from Mexico to face U.S. prosecution for drug agents tonight if they can't get the dad, his son.
SWAT teams.
From shooting down a Mexican Army helicopter, killing 6, to being implicated in a public hanging.
Imagine a midnight showdown in the heart of California, where the FBI and ICE converge on a fortified hideout, guns blazing, to finally bring down El Mencho, one of the most elusive cartel leaders in history. At exactly 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, a silent flurry of monitors lit up in a federal command center, signaling the start of a 5-day, 23-division assault that spanned 7 countries. This wasn't a routine bust. It was a meticulously choreographed strike designed to sever every pipeline, distribution channel, and money trail of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. In just a single county, over a week's worth of operations had already netted 300 pounds of meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. Today, we break down the moment the law finally caught up to the cartel kingpin in California, the tactics that made it happen, and why this raid marks a turning point in the war against drug trafficking. Stay tuned as we dive into the details that turned a quiet midnight raid into a headline-making triumph. At exactly 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, the glow of hundreds of monitors flickered in a federal command center. And in that single instant, a silent row of screens lit up with the names of one of the most violent criminal empires on Earth. For years, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known in the streets as CJNG, had flooded American neighborhoods with meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. It had slipped into the veins of cities and towns, a poison threaded through the everyday. But that morning marked the first time the United States would strike back with overwhelming, coordinated force. What unfolded was not a routine raid. It was a 5-day, multi-agency assault that enlisted 23 U.S. field divisions and 7 foreign partners. Every action was timed with surgical precision, leaving CJNG no opportunity to reroute product, destroy evidence, or hide money. The objective was simple yet brutal: sever the cartel's pipelines, cut its distribution chain, and dismantle the infrastructure that kept its empire alive. One surviving node would allow CJNG to rebuild. A chain snapped everywhere would choke the operation. In the early hours, agents began to notice an unsettling silence. When a single city had been hit in past operations, the cartel simply shifted its load to another corridor. But here, there was nowhere to run. Raids detonated across Los Angeles, Houston, the Pacific Northwest, and New England, all in the same window. At the exact same hour, foreign partners targeted CJNG assets overseas. It was a synchronized strike, fast, silent, and ruthless. Yet the question lingered: how deep had CJNG embedded itself into American life? The answer came in waves of shocking confirmations. Stash houses sprouted in quiet suburbs, distribution hubs lurked near family neighborhoods, and couriers blended into everyday work crews. CJNG was no street gang hiding in shadows. It was a global enterprise operating in more than 40 countries, disguised as normalcy. By 72 hours, surveillance teams felt the first tremors of panic inside the network. Couriers vanished from routes. Regional distributors went dark. Financial channels froze. CJNG's fluid communication fractured. The machine, still running, was coughing, stumbling, losing rhythm. Then came the seizures. When agents breached warehouses and transport nodes, they uncovered staggering quantities: 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, all potent enough to kill. Each bag, each crate was more than contraband. Each represented lives that would have been lost, families that would have buried loved ones, neighborhoods that would have drowned in addiction. The hits didn't stop at narcotics. Agents stripped the cartel of $48 million in cash and assets used to buy loyalty, traffic influence, and expand its reach. Alongside it, 244 firearms were pulled from circulation, tools of intimidation, enforcement, and terror. CJNG felt the blow. For the first time, the cartel's U.S. network wasn't bending under pressure, it was breaking. But as agents pushed further, one realization sent a chill through the command floor. If this much product, money, and firepower existed on American soil, what else was still buried in the system? The investigation that followed revealed the cartel's true scale and proved that this takedown was only the opening move. Across those 5 days, the operation shattered any illusion that CJNG was merely another cartel. This was a multinational engine that ran on logistics, discipline, and death. Intelligence files began to reveal a clearer picture. The network that had just been struck was only one layer of a sprawling structure spread across continents. Chemical precursors arrived from foreign suppliers. Mega laboratories operated in Mexico, producing drugs in bulk. Cross-border transport routes used commercial trucks, smuggling millions of pounds across borders under the guise of legitimate cargo. Suburban stash houses in the United States hid the final stages of distribution, while local redistributors fed neighborhoods one shipment at a time. CJNG didn't behave like a gang. It operated like a corporation with a single product line: poison. That was the threat. Even decapitated, the machine could regrow. Even crippled, it could adapt. Federal commanders knew it. DEA analysts knew it. Every agent in the field understood a simple reality. This takedown mattered only if the infrastructure stayed broken. If even one corridor reopened, CJNG would return with the same brutality, the same money, the same reach. Yet this time, the cartel didn't get its usual breathing room. For years, CJNG thrived by exploiting delays: court delays, jurisdiction delays, communication delays. But during this surge, there were no delays. The hits came too fast, too widespread, too synchronized to counter. When Los Angeles was breached, Houston was already being raided. When New England fell silent, the Pacific Northwest was under arrest. The network that had once spread its poison like a slow, relentless tide had been struck at its core. And as the command center monitored the cascading seizures and arrests, it became clear that this was more than a drug bust. It was a decisive blow to a global empire that had, for too long, masqueraded as a shadowy gang. The story continues beyond the raid, but the impact of that first day, the precision of the coordination, the sheer scale of the seizures, the unraveling of a global logistics network, remains a stark reminder. The cartel's reach had been exposed, and its infrastructure was in tatters. Whether this will be enough to keep the poison out of the streets forever remains to be seen. But for now, the United States had struck a devastating blow that reverberated far beyond its borders, sending a clear message. The drug trade's lifelines can be severed, and when they are, the repercussions echo across nations. When those numbers were first logged, agents didn't see statistics. They saw the scale of destruction that stretched across city streets and suburban cul-de-sacs alike. A silent tide of despair that had already claimed thousands of lives and continued to seep into every neighborhood.
The DEA's Brian McKnight showed us what's going on in broad daylight.
There's literally a line. Now everyone's coming back out.
Yeah, see the guys putting...
The first clue that tipped the balance was the realization that the cartel's poison could be disguised as a pill. Fentanyl, pressed to mimic Adderall, Xanax, and oxycodone, didn't just float in abandoned warehouses. It hid in the hands of people who thought they were buying prescription medicine. A quick forensic test on a bag of counterfeit pills revealed the lethal concentration of fentanyl that, on its own, could kill more than a dozen people if taken at once. The danger was not just the drug's potency, it was its ubiquity. A child could mistake it for a sugar pill. An addict could take it in a moment of desperation, unaware of the minute the drug's lethal dose had entered their bloodstream. Alongside this unsettling revelation came another: the cartel's ability to blend seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. Investigators walked down streets that had once been considered safe and found, in unmarked homes and quiet cul-de-sacs, very same logistical nodes that fed the drug supply into the city. Couriers posing as delivery drivers, dispatchers in local logistics firms, and even small shop owners with front windows and backyards that doubled as transit hubs were all part of a sprawling network that had gone unnoticed. The cartels were not invaders, they were settlers, carving a presence into the American landscape so deeply that the very neighborhoods they targeted were their own. In the span of 5 relentless days, federal teams did not merely seize drugs and guns, they removed 670 linked suspects from the system: street dealers, transporters, middle-tier managers, and couriers who kept the supply line humming. Each arrest was a severed artery, and each interrogation peeled back another layer of the cartel's intricate architecture. Phones and laptops turned over to analysts became a treasure trove of encrypted communications. Every stolen device, every intercepted text revealed a new link, a new conduit through which the cartel moved funds, weapons, and the deadly product itself. Yet perhaps the most decisive blow came from the money seized. $48 million in cash and assets, while seemingly a number, represented a lifeline for the cartel. To CJNG, money was not a trophy. It was a weapon that financed shell companies, purchased safe houses, bought silence, funded corruption, and built loyalty. Strip that money from the machine and it starves. The operation was not simply about smashing the cartel's bones, it was about draining its blood. The fentanyl seized, 92 kilograms of powder and 1.1 million counterfeit pills, was not just a headline. A chilling calculation ran through the heads of officials. With that amount of product, the potential death toll was not measured in hundreds, but in the millions. It was at this point that many officials stopped calling CJNG a cartel and began labeling it a foreign terrorist organization. Not for an ideological motive, but for the sheer impact. A weapon that did not kill on a battlefield, but on streets, in kitchens, in the quiet hours of the night. This realization shifted the operation from seizure to shutdown. Analysts, in real time, collapsed communication nodes, intercepted courier chains, and froze financial routes before they could be rerouted overseas. The last 48 hours of the surge saw a relentless assault, night entries, rapid takedowns, and non-stop intel sweeps designed to expose hidden links before they vanished. Every hour was a gamble. Every delay risked the cartel's recovery. By day 5, the numbers told a story no briefing could fully capture. 6,000 kilos of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, 670 arrests, $48 million in cash and assets stripped away. It was one of the largest cartel disruptions in modern U.S. history. But even in the midst of this staggering victory, commanders whispered a warning that echoed in closed rooms. This was only round 1. The leadership had slipped through the net, and the next 72 hours would determine whether the empire stayed down or found a way to rise again. The final stretch of the surge revealed that the mission was not simply about seizing drugs or cuffing suspects. It was about stopping something far bigger from reforming once the smoke cleared. CJNG's US and network had been hit harder than ever before, but the leadership was still out there. If even one communication line remained intact, the cartel could rebuild in days, not months. The only way to break the loop was to expose how the network operated beneath the surface. Seized phones, ledgers, laptops, and routing notes painted a disturbing picture. CJNG wasn't hiding in remote corners of cartel territory. It was hiding in plain sight, using suburban stash houses, commercial trucking routes, small shell companies, and neighborhood fronts that didn't raise suspicion until it was too late. The drugs they pushed were mass-produced in Mexico, but the delivery system was American. Quiet streets, ordinary storefronts, everyday traffic. Families lived a few walls away from international trafficking hubs without ever knowing it. That was why the seizures mattered so much. The 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million pills were more than cargo. They were a testament to the cartel's reach and a stark reminder that the battle for public health had taken on a new, clandestine front. In the aftermath, the authorities celebrated a triumph on paper, yet understood that the fight was far from over. The next step was to track down the elusive Mencho, the kingpin who orchestrated the entire operation. A coordinated raid in California involving the FBI and ICE would eventually bring him to justice. The raid's success would cement the message that the U.S. is no longer a passive playground for foreign criminal forces. It would send a clear signal to CJNG that the walls of their home country are no longer open, and that every citizen, from the busiest city to the quietest suburb, has a stake in protecting their streets from the shadowy threat that once hid behind ordinary facades. The sudden hush that fell over the command center after the raid had ended was not the kind of silence that celebrates triumph. It was the weight of unfinished business, the kind of quiet that only the most seasoned operators feel when they realize that the enemy's heartbeat is still echoing through the streets. The seizure of 6,000 kilos of meth, 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl, 1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, 670 arrests, and $48 million in cash and assets felt like a tidal wave pulling back. It was a wave that had stripped the cartel's surface layer, exposed a network that ran through suburban garages and local trucking companies, and cut off the immediate flow of drugs that were killing people in every corner of the country. Yet, as the agents turned their eyes from the racks of confiscated drugs to the digital trail left in the seized laptops and phones, a new picture emerged. The financial wound was deep, but it was not the core of the empire. Money, as the agents knew, is the lifeblood that pays bribes, keeps recruiters talking, feeds stash houses, and buys the discretion of suppliers. Seizing $48 million was a critical blow, a statement that the U.S. could strike hard. But it did not sever the bones of a structure built across borders, with laboratories in Mexico, suppliers in Central America, and a chain of command insulated behind layers of anonymity. The leadership. The names that still whispered through encrypted messages, the faces that had remained out of sight, were still alive. Mencho, the kingpin whose name had become synonymous with violence and innovation, was still at the helm.
The jungle. Mencho's cartel is responsible for roughly a third of the drugs entering this country by land and...
He had watched the raid from a distance, his own network of operatives slipping through the cracks like sand. The agents in the command center understood that every day the cartel could rewire, rebrand, and redirect. The surge had proven that when agencies move as one, they can collapse a visible arm of the empire. But the body can still regenerate if left unchecked. The reality that hung over the room was clear. A single raid or a single seizure is a pause, not a finish line. The cartel's strength lay in its placement, hidden in suburban streets, disguised as ordinary storefronts, and concealed behind counterfeit pills that looked harmless until they turned lethal. The drug supply chain was a global corporation, with suppliers rotating, couriers disposable, and leadership protected by distance and deniability. Cutting off one set of routes did not dismantle the entire network. It merely forced the cartel to rewire its veins. The agents discussed the next steps with the same urgency that had fueled the initial raid. Constant pressure, synchronized strikes, and relentless scrutiny were the only weapons that could keep the cartel from breathing again. They talked about monitoring the remaining communication nodes, intercepting courier chains before they could be rerouted, and freezing assets that had yet to be seized. The money was a crucial lever, but it was the intelligence that would keep the cartel's structure in the gutter. There was also an unspoken agreement that the war would not be won on headlines alone. It would be won in the streets, in the eyes of families who had lost loved ones to overdose, in the quiet nights of parents who watched their children grow up in neighborhoods that were quietly under siege by a cartel's reach. The narrative had to shift from the glamour of the raid to the everyday reality that the cartel's presence was felt in every county line, in every school district that had seen a spike in drug-related deaths. The raid in California was a symbolic act that underscored a larger truth. The cartel's empire was not contained within one state or even one border. It was a global threat, and the U.S. would need to match that scope with coordinated global pressure. The agents in the room understood that the next time the cartel moved, America would be ready, not just with guns, but with data, with partnerships, with the knowledge that the cartel could not simply rebuild elsewhere and return to the same places. The seizure of $48 million had demonstrated that the U.S. could take away the cartel's purse strings, but the next step would be to keep that line closed, to monitor the flow of capital, to intercept new shipments before they could reach the streets. El Mencho's arrest, the culmination of years of surveillance, had finally breached the outer armor of the cartel. He was taken into custody in a raid that cut through layers of secrecy and fear. The agents watched as the man who had orchestrated the shipment of millions of kilos, who had hidden his operations in plain sight, was finally dragged into a federal courthouse. It was a moment that echoed through the command center, a tangible symbol of the agency's capability to strike at the heart of the cartel. Yet the agents' faces held a sober reflection. The arrest did not mean the end. It meant that the next wave of the cartel could still come, faster and harder if the pressure was not sustained. The seizure of drugs and money had been a shock to the cartel's immediate operations, but the cartel's core, its leadership, its suppliers, its networks, remained intact. The agents understood that the next step was to keep the pressure from lifting, to make the cartel's next move an impossible one. In the end, the surge had proven what the agencies had feared. The cartel could be stopped, but only for a while. The fight was not over. It was simply a chapter in a larger, ongoing war. The seizure of $48 million in cash, the dismantling of distribution lines, the arrest of El Mencho, all were victories that demonstrated the power of coordinated, relentless action. But the story also carried a warning. The cartel is a global threat, and America must remain vigilant. The next time the cartel's shadows creep into the quiet corners of a suburb, America will be waiting, ready to strike again, to cut the lifelines before they can reignite. The war continues, but with each strike, the map of the cartel becomes thinner, the network more exposed, and the hope for communities in every street brighter. The raid in California had rippled beyond the immediate seizure of drugs and money. It carved a new path into the cartel's infrastructure, revealing choke points that had previously been hidden under layers of deception. The agents in the command center watched the footage as the walls of a warehouse fell, the concrete crumbling, the scent of gunpowder mixing with the cold steel of confiscated cash. In that instant, a strategic blueprint emerged. Every time the cartel tightened its grip, there would be a countermeasure that matched its scale. The first order of business was to lock the channels that the cartel used to move capital across borders. Every bank account linked to the seized funds was flagged. Every wire transfer monitored for suspicious activity. Intelligence units scoured financial reports, looking for patterns that hinted at new routes. The collaboration between the FBI and ICE proved indispensable. ICE's border enforcement provided ground-level intelligence, while the FBI's analytical capabilities turned raw data into actionable insights. Together, they mapped the money trail, tracing it from the Mexican border through clandestine exchanges in small American towns to offshore accounts in remote jurisdictions. The map, once a maze of red threads, became a series of intersecting lines that law enforcement could target with surgical precision. Beyond the financial lifelines, the agents turned their attention to the cartel's supply chain. The seizure of millions of kilos had exposed the distribution hubs that fed local markets. In every city where the cartel's influence had surged, new checkpoints were established. Trained officers were positioned along P highways using predictive analytics to anticipate smuggling routes. Drone surveillance added a new layer of visibility, spotting suspicious vehicles that moved under the cover of night. By combining satellite imagery with on-the-ground reports, the agencies could create a real-time picture of the cartel's movements, allowing them to intercept shipments before they even reached the streets. The arrest of El Mencho itself was a watershed moment, but the agents understood that his removal would not immediately collapse the cartel. Leadership structures had evolved into a network of cell leaders, each capable of operating independently. The agencies therefore expanded their focus to the cartel's communication infrastructure. Cell phones, encrypted messaging apps, and coded radio transmissions were monitored for signs of coordination. Cyber units worked to trace the digital footprints, hunting for the signatures of the cartel's command hierarchy. Every new contact point became a potential breach that could lead to the dismantling of further cells. Meanwhile, community outreach became a strategic component of the operation. The agencies partnered with local law enforcement, social services, and community leaders to address the root causes that made drug trafficking attractive. Educational programs were rolled out in schools, emphasizing the dangers of the drug trade and offering alternative pathways for youth. Economic development projects were introduced in affected neighborhoods, creating jobs and reducing the lure of cartel employment. These initiatives not only undermined the cartel's recruitment efforts, but also built a network of local allies who could report suspicious activity.